Thank you very much indeed for staying in here. And Carl Bildt's here as well to talk about what I'm going to share with you over the next half hour. I'm Nick Gowing, and I used to be in television, but I'm sharing a lot of data with you about the challenges now of being a leader, based on some original research which we literally published 3 days ago. I want to pay tribute, like Constanza did earlier today, to Silke Tempel from International Politik in Berlin, who was killed in the storm on the 5th of October, because she was one of the first people who understood the value of the research that we began 4 years ago. And many in government and in business didn't really want to listen. But she gripped it, and at the beginning of 2016, she published a lead article about exactly what I'm going to share with you over the next half hour. And so great tribute to her, because much of what I'm going to say to you doesn't come easy. It's a bit like fake news. It doesn't come easy until you realize the inevitability of what is happening. What I want to do is pick up with some of the issues that the President raised last night and what you've heard already. So I want this to be a continuity for you. There she was talking about the public fearlessly demanding politicians do their work better. Our voters demand quick fixes from us as political leaders. And more important than any of that, we're much closer to the cliff edge than at the start of the century. Now, this is about the capacity of leaders. Some of you are no longer leaders, about what has happened and why it's happened. So what I want to do, and I've been asked to do, Rina spoke to me a couple of weeks, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and said, what could you do? I mean, we need a keynote speaker with some new ideas. And I said, well, we've got this new stuff. Would you like me to share it with those who are struggling with so many issues? So thank you, Rina, for inviting me. And I hope in the next 45 minutes that you will feel that this is giving you new insight into something which doesn't come easy to a lot of people. What is happening at the moment is really equivalent to something like a red alert. And that's why this slide has nothing more than color on it. Because this is now an end to conformity. The conformity of many leaders and what we've been hearing in the last few hours and yesterday is really underpinning many of the problems. And what I'm going to share with you is new data with large numbers of interviews with chairmen, chief executives, senior people in government as well, about the real challenges that they've got. They don't want to talk about it loudly. They've talked about it confidentially, and we've brought it together. Most of them are anonymous. So the question really is, how brave are you in thinking the unthinkable? Because, of course, you can't think unthinkables, whether in any language. But it's from Herman Kahn and the nuclear challenges in early 1962 and so on. It's really relevant at the moment to understand the enormity of the challenge that leaders are facing, particularly how you prepare for it smartly. And our contention would be very strongly that this is about opening eyes, opening confidence, opening strength for those in positions of power and responsibility to feel they can do things in a very different way. And the question I've got for you is, how brave can you be? Because that's why I've put up that board there, because I'd like to come back to you in a few moments. This can be the Lennart Meri 2018 brainstorming of the unthinkables, which should be being thought about, but frankly are not. So I'm just going to write up whatever you say. There may be only 2 of you, there may be more of you. But it really is trying to work out, would we have been talking about this 3 or 4, 5 years ago? Brexit, Trump, migration, Russia. Why leaders are losing the plot on multiple issues. You, if you're a leader, may think that's a bit rich for someone like Gowing to be standing up there saying, why are leaders losing the plot? But the fact is, the data that we've got has shown that it's the leaders themselves who confirm they are losing the plot. So the challenge is not to be negative. It's actually to be pessimistic. This is about being realistic and seeing how you can thrive from change. And we've literally got hundreds of interviews. Now, what I want to do is just remind you of some of the stuff you've been hearing since this morning. The rather sinister framing that's already been put out there, which is why this is really important for all of you, whether you're in the think tank world or you're still in politics or you're a corporate representative. When Mark Galeotti said, we are losing the imagination race. Thinking the Unthinkable is about the imagination race. How to tap into and imagine ever, as he put it, weirder and weirder gambles and ruses. We are too sober. With Unthinkables should the new NATO intelligence and imagination cell be about? Imagination, thinking about things which are not being thought about. They weren't thinking about a Russian intervention in eastern Ukraine or Crimea back in 2014. How does that get embedded in systems of government and governance? Andrei Soldatov, what will the new drug be for the future when it comes to the new challenges of security that we've been talking about here? And Ant as well, how to be quicker and to attribute. Daniel, if there is a mismatch among tools, what is the new need? So already many of these issues have been put very squarely on the agenda in the last few hours. And I'm just trying to pick up, and Constance's bleakness as well, about where NATO is at the moment. It's 6 weeks before the NATO summit. It used to be about means, now it's ends to survive almost as a credible institution. And Claudio Maia as well, we're not talking about things that are really painful. So perhaps I can help you understand and appreciate things which are painful. I'm still very struck by one phrase when the German Auswärtiges invited me in, Thomas Bagger, the head of planning, 2 years ago, and said, we've got a problem, we're not thinking about these things. But he came up with a great phrase, it's called the end to tranquility. And I would put to you, that's exactly where we are. It's an end to tranquility, and much of the framing, even today, has still been in that traditional way of thinking within institutions and the governance at the top. The main finding, I'll tell you now, of our research is this. The conformity which gets you to the top, in many ways disqualifies you now from understanding and appreciating and gripping the scale of disruption and what to do about it. Now, I don't see any of you nodding at the moment, but maybe you are quietly in your mind. But there are many, when we put it to them, whether in public or private, who say, that's exactly me. And what there is there's a great cross-fertilization between the public sector and the corporate sector. All of you are in the same boat. There's much to learn, but there isn't much time to learn it in. And that's critical, because so much is happening so quickly in this new unthinkable world. So think about those ideas, can you, for Unthinkable. I just want them to come out very, very quickly in about 3 minutes. But let me stimulate you a bit further. Let's go beyond security. If we here last year had been thinking about Unthinkables, would we have put this on the agenda in the way that it has now become so important for so many issues in public life, whether in the corporate sector, in the church, in the media, in the movie business? It's now decimated careers in a way which those who were involved in disgraceful activity should have realized, but it was an unthinkable. They didn't believe it would happen in ways that all of you know. And think of what happened to the Nobel Committee in Norway as well. Look at what happened there, Sweden. Look at what happened there with the Look at what happened there with the withdrawal of the Literature Prize, simply because of what was revealed. It was known about, but actually it wasn't something which was being actively considered. And think about something like this. In Cape Town, almost running out of water, the unthinkable of a city the size of 4 million, maybe 6 million. It almost ran out of water in April. An app on a mobile phone would have told you if you went there in April, you would have no water left. This is now one of 10, 11 cities which can run out of water. They've managed to get through it. But an important part of this is actually this. There would have been only 200 standpipes for only a minimum amount of water. Why do I put that up there? Because this is emblematic of something far more fundamental about what is happening. It's about how there's a new definition and a new way of looking at security, of national security. It's not the security from outside threats. It's the threat from instability in a country. And additionally to what I showed you earlier with Weinstein, there's this. Would we have been talking about this in the way that this has happened on March the 3rd back in the United Kingdom? And finally, one other issue which really symbolizes, excuse me, which symbolizes, sorry, I don't have a lot of light up here, which symbolizes really everything that we're talking about. This is the £3 billion aircraft carrier of the United Kingdom, the Queen Elizabeth, and someone bought a drone and decided to fly it over. And this is the result. Think of the security implications of that. Now, I've said that this is not just about public service, this is about the corporate sector. Let me bring that right to the fore by quoting to you Steve Schwarzman, who's Blackstone in the United States, one of the second or third largest companies in the United States. It's what he has said to 3,500 business leaders about the way things are changing, about the way you've got to think in a different way, and the speed at which you have to do it. Let me offer you this. It takes about a minute. It happened to be in Saudi Arabia, but it's the message that he gave.
Technology is affecting almost everything we know. At Blackstone, we have probably 120 companies we own at any point in time. We employ somewhere, depending on what we own, 500 to 600,000 people. We're usually the second or third biggest employer in the United States. We have a whole range of companies, and there are many people who are here with us who have similar types of exposures. So this is a large company that we have. Nothing remains the same. And this is a warning to all of you who live your lives and think it's going to be the same the next day. It's changing so fast, whether it's the modes of distribution. You know, you can be in retailing and all of a sudden find your customers are leaving you and you have good merchandise because they can buy it online. They can buy your stuff online. The margin isn't as big. We're seeing changes in supply. It's happening everywhere. And we're sending our people, in effect, back to school so they can learn, not at the expense of making an investment and then it ends up going wrong because they didn't know what was going to happen to it. But even as more conventional investors, you have to learn, you have to know, or else your children won't be able to inherit businesses that you have. They'll be damaged.
Nothing remains the same. It's a warning to all of you. So even if you're skeptical about the kind of evidence which I'm going to give you a little later, this is the kind of profound change which is underway. I was in Copenhagen a few days ago where they were talking about the Armageddon in the retail trade. Think of the societal impact of that. Let me quote to you a person who has very much emphasized this from the point of view of the way things are going. It's about the new zombie orthodoxies. Jeff Mulgan, who used to work in Number 10, he now works as the chief executive of the National Endowment for Science, Technology and Arts. He uses the phrase zombie orthodoxies, the orthodoxies which are in minds which are simply no longer relevant and no longer appropriate for the kind of things which are out there. It's easy to symbolize them with, of course, the black swan, or the much bigger black elephant. The black elephant which is in the room, it's not a black squirrel, it's not a black mouse, it's a black elephant because of the enormity of what's coming down the track and the uncertainty of what it's going to do. And how is that going to be embraced? Of course, you're all familiar with that. But this is now a profound challenge in so many of the areas that we've been talking about today. Or alternatively, something that NATO has developed, the black jellyfish, simultaneous predictable developments causing disruption when they converge through innovation. So what we're talking is about a dramatic change in the environment in which all of you are operating. But what is the scale of the challenge? What should the scale of the challenge be before I come to you? Chris Donnelly, who some of you will know from NATO, is the director of the Institute of Statecraft, and in our view, he encapsulates it brilliantly. The rate of change we're going through at the moment is comparable to what happens in wartime, yet we think we're at peace. what happens in wartime, the ability to adapt in wartime. The global pace of change is overcoming the capacity of national and international institutions. Another senior figure who we quote is someone who's now gone public with it. The scale of the challenge is like eating an elephant in one mouthful. There's now so much which is challenging everyone in a position of public responsibility that it's almost impossible now to handle it. So let me see, any ideas out there at the moment of unthinkables? Or are you all completely happy about the way things are going? Please, just shout out. Have we got a microphone, please? Can we get the microphone quickly? Let's do it very quickly. I just want 3 or 4 words will be great.
Okay. Gawa field, the largest oil field on Earth, 6 million barrels a day, and you get one terrorist incident which takes it out. And
is that really an unthinkable?
Well, it hasn't happened yet, and it will be very bad indeed.
All right. Anything else, please? Anyone else, please? Yes, over here. Anyone else? Is that a microphone?
A change to the internet protocols by another nation that pulls everybody into their system.
Okay. Anything else? Just get the microphone and speak, can you? Anyone else? I got my back to you. Anyone else? Please. Anyone? Yes, over here. Can you speak loudly and then...
Yes, I can. Failure of the dominating economic theory. The tools that we use to manipulate our economy no longer work.
Okay. Anyone else?
Major water and food shortages on a regular basis in what are considered first world countries.
Yep, and that's something why I put Cape Town up there. Okay.
A worldwide pandemonia.
Pandemonium?
Yeah.
Pandemic? Is that unthinkable? Anything else? Okay, anything else?
Research in AI leading to a technological singularity.
Singularity.
Technological singularity.
Okay, anything else? What?
Come over the regular currency.
Okay, is that unthinkable? Okay, anything else quickly?
Compulsory chipping with complete personal data available to authorities and economic
But let's be
entities.
clear, is that really unthinkable? I've got to press you.
We decide. Technically, it's not.
Okay, anything else, please?
Non-linear ice melt in the Arctic changes shipping patterns very suddenly.
Is that really unthinkable?
So far.
Okay, one more, and I'll... Piece of... Okay.
Invasion from outer space.
Okay.
Life expectancy going
right.
up. I have one more.
Use of a nuclear weapon.
Shall we leave it like that for the moment?
I
Because
have
asteroids are not unthinkable. They do happen, and they hit...
Use of a nuclear weapon.
Is that really unthinkable?
We've thought so far.
All right. Look, what you've done is you've begun to think about the things which maybe we should be thinking about this time next year at Lennart, Meri, or any other gathering we all get to. But what about the capacity to handle all of this? I'm very struck by Ian Conn, who is the chief executive of Centrica, which is the gas provider in the United Kingdom. He said this at the Brussels Forum, but I'm putting it up there because he chose to say it publicly. And he chose to say it publicly representing a large number of those we've been interviewing. He said this: it's now moving too fast. It's a revolution, it's not evolution. There are many accelerations at once. One of the biggest problems is the difficulty of mankind to cope with it. I don't know whether political leaders or business leaders can easily handle it. Now, I'm sharing with you that many of the people we've been talking to are saying exactly the same thing. When we were doing a pre-launch for the book that Chris Langdon and I have written literally in the last 3 months, and we're publishing it this week, a very senior chairman of a very large company who'd been involved in helping us said it's getting much worse when it comes to controlling and understanding the enormity of change and the implications for all of us. Now, Merkel has disappeared with her eyes, so I don't have to go over that, but I could remind you of the way Macron has changed things in politics. The way Merkel has been struggling with politics. The way in the United Kingdom there's a struggle on as well to understand what is happening. It is what, in our analysis, when it comes to the red screen and thinking the unthinkable, it's about pushbackism. It's about pushback against the systems which so many people are becoming increasingly disillusioned with. Now, you may say, that's a bit rich, but what we're seeing is a change in fabric which is far greater and far faster than anyone really is prepared to admit. And so the incrementalism, which is bedeviling much of the policy making, is actually holding it back at the same time, which is why I quoted some of the great quotes from Ed Lucas and what Constanza's panel had, because that was about pushing at the limits now, about new imagination. What kind of phrases are we talking about in this kind of new environment? Well, Stephen Fry, who is one of the great dramatists, he's also an actor, but he encapsulates the kind of thing that we're talking about. We're talking about the greatest change to our way of living. Similarly, the Astronomer Royal in the United Kingdom, Lord Martin Rees, now talks about a big challenge to governance. Obviously, I'm just cherry-picking stuff which is very clear in terms of a direction of travel. Here is one of the leading broadcasters in the United Kingdom, Jeremy Vine, someone I certainly admire. He's been on the radio for 15 years, a great operator, but it's what he's done with his data for his morning radio show, which is important. Over 15 years, he's had 25,000 people calling in. And what he says now is that the listeners have got themselves into a position where they are in control. Listeners tell me the news. They run it now, and the elite is upended. So this is the way things are moving. Now, what are those at the top saying? You might be saying, so what? What next in this? What are the solutions? Because that's what those out there are saying. So what? What next? What are the solutions? How do we thrive on change in this new environment? And that's what we set out to do. Some of you will know I used to be a television presenter. 4 years ago when I left the BBC, it was about the time that Putin was moving into eastern Ukraine and Crimea was happening. It became clear that big things were happening, and I didn't expect to be doing this. But it became a fascination of why leaders at the top were struggling with this new environment. What we did is we have done these vast numbers of interviews, and I want to show you how things are shifting now. These were our findings, our interim findings, from February 2016, quoting them. Overwhelmed by multiple intense pressures, institutional conformity, willful blindness, groupthink, risk aversion, and this is a critical one. Many people are not passing stuff up through systems, whether in public service or in the corporate sector, because they're frightened of losing their jobs. This is a big, oppressive kind of blanket which is sitting on top of people. And in this kind of environment, many would be nodding. This is what's blocking stuff getting into the top. The kind of vision, the kind of insight that there is among many people who are working for large companies or in public services about what could be done, and a degree of frustration, and above all, cognitive overload and dissonance. You may say, well, that could have gone up there 30 years ago. Right. The problem is, it's now affecting and afflicting much of leadership in a way which is becoming destructive and also, in their words, existential as a threat. Existential as a threat, both in the corporate sector and in the public sector. So let's move on with that critical word of, it ain't affecting us. It's not relevant, in public at least, but in private they say, this is now a profound element of problems. So, let's move on to where we got to literally a month ago with a complete new data crunch, validating all the information that we've got from several hundred interviews, thousands of pages of transcripts. And these are the elements now which are making it very difficult for leaders in this new environment. The short-termism, being confused, and above all, fear. These are their words. We don't say, are you confused? Is this short-termism? Are you worried? They volunteer it. So short-termism, confused, and fear. That's the group which is really overriding many of the problems that there are out there now for making good decisions in this environment, coming up with the imagination. Other things have come back through since those three have been identified. Risk aversion, which is the same as in 2016. Purpose, inclusivity, and diversity. I'll come back to those two in a moment. Overwhelmed, that's the same. It's getting even worse. And this is all done by data and analysis. Groupthink, which is the same as it was back in 2016. Institutional conformity, and also two others, behavior, and above all, cognitive overload, which was there again in 2016. Now, what is this showing in the last 2 years, and why what the President said last night and what was coming out of the earlier discussions is so important? It's the inclusion of three groups. Those are the correlations between the left and the right, but the three groups are here: purpose, inclusivity and diversity, and above all, behavior. And what you're therefore seeing in summary is a real pushback and a real awareness that something has to change in leadership. Otherwise, there will be that disconnect between the political class and the voters, and the corporate class and those who buy their products. It's not us who's saying that, it's them. What is the new purpose? Many of you will be familiar with the fact that purpose is the new corporate social responsibility. Actually, it's become something which is significant because it is being talked about as something which will generate popularity, or at least a willingness of the public to be part of a company. If not, then many will decide to go elsewhere to buy their products. And in all of this, on purpose, inclusivity and diversity and behavior, a critical element is the next generation. The next generation is becoming alienated by all of this and doesn't like what it sees, both with the voting patterns and the voting option, and also the issue of where companies and how companies are operating. So, what is needed in this new environment, according to those who are out there telling us all of this? It requires a new awareness of these new parameters. It requires thinking, new attitudes, new culture, mindset, and behavior, and receptiveness as well, to modify what you do and how you do it at the top. One of the things that's come through loud and clear, we started this project with thinking the unthinkable, is that actually it's thinking the unpalatable. Because in so many cases, it's about the unpalatability of much of what is coming down the track. And the question is, why is it not getting to the top? Why is there a need for a degree of political correctness within a company and also within governments? And those who are working in civil services and those who are working in governments, in corporates, will in this room will probably feel the same way. It's why is information not getting up to the top? Because and that's because of the way there are blockages which are happening. It is, to quote Ian Conn again, because he's one of the few people who's been prepared to talk publicly, it is about business having to form a different relationship with society and government. And right now it's at a low point. We're going to have to find a way to be trusted. Power is shifting to the customer because they have more choice, and digitization is accelerating the whole thing. One of the key words which keeps coming through, it's a dreadful, truly dreadful word, is the following. It's almost not a word. It's the fact is, within many organizations, there's a degree of deresponsibilization. Everyone offloading because they don't want to actually be carrying the can when something happens in a way that all of you are familiar with. Another word which is coming through time and again is the need to de-hierarchize. It's not our word, it's their word. De-hierarchize what is happening inside an organization. How do you do that in this new environment? Now, I'm not going to speak for much longer, but I want to share with you, I think, what can be learned from the disaster, the near disaster, which Facebook went through a couple of months ago. And there's a lot to learn because of the way they believed it wouldn't hit them. YouTube Facebook and Google all did not believe that the closeness of videos, nasty videos to advertising would backfire. But it did, and there's been an unpleasantness. Zuckerberg on the 4th of January talked in his annual lecture, in his annual statement to the staff, of the need to improve things. This is before the Cambridge Analytica problem. Need to improve things. We currently make too many errors in enforcing our policies and preventing misuse of our tools. Coming through loud and clear from many of our discussions with me and Chris has been the fact that many know they are in difficulty but don't know how to get out of it. So Zuckerberg was talking about that, and this was before the issue of Cambridge Analytica. He talked about serious year of self-improvement, and this was before Cambridge Analytica. Fast forward to what happened in the Senate, and these are the words which I want to leave with you. When he appeared in the Senate, it was the kind of thing which we are seeing time and time again in the interviews that we're doing. This sense of we are essentially an idealistic and optimistic company, not prepared to think about the big negatives that there are out there and which are afflicting both the corporate sector and many governments in this new world of disruption. And therefore, the language that Zuckerberg used is an example to many about what not to do in this new environment, and it's the same for politicians as well.
But it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. And that goes for fake news, for foreign interference in elections, and hate speech, as well as developers and data privacy. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry. I started Facebook, I run it, and I'm responsible for what happens here.
And that had been reinforced by one of his senior figures who talked a few days earlier, Campbell Brown, about we have been as a tech company too focused on the positive and not nearly vigilant enough about the negative. We have been caught flat-footed. So this is the environment in which all of you are operating. And we can say that much of what we're suggesting or much of what is coming to light does not require the spending of money. It's about changing of the mindset, the culture, and the behavior. It's about how you turn the language inside your company or your department into something different. A wacky idea is often now a wise idea. A bonkers idea is actually something which is far more important than an idea which is kept somewhere in the back. And what I want to leave you with is an impression of how there are many, many out there who are not feeling comfortable by the way things are going in this new environment. We see now, this is why I'm delighted to be able to talk here, about the possibilities of joining together for the leadership challenge. We see a large number of leaders in institutions, government departments, corporates, who want to bring together their experience and what they're going through in this new environment. They want to see it like lily pads out there on an enormous ocean, an infinite ocean, being brought together by a shared experience, somehow sharing that experience because many are actually in that sense of being overwhelmed and worried about what is happening, both for them and also for their companies and their institutions. How do you converge the data and also converge the challenges as well? And one final thought comes with the person who's going to take over as the Chief of Defence in the United Kingdom on the 11th of June, General Sir Nick Carter. He decided to share some of what he's been doing in the British Army for the last 4 years, a reform programme. It hasn't stopped him getting the top job. He talked about the true difficulties of defence's ability to be able to adapt to change and to challenge. We're talking about a top-down environment. He's tried to create a new mood of reform in the military. And one of the things he said, which has been so important, is that it is important now and it is possible to have humility and empathy in leadership, even if you're a military commander. And those words are coming through time and time again from leaders in the corporate sector and also in public service. The question is, how do you achieve it in this new environment? Because the world is changing around us. Ultimately, those at the top have to lead. But as he says, the institution has to be a place where people argue and debate until the decision is made, and then you obey orders. I leave that with you because for someone who's taken that kind of risk, it hasn't been popular within the British Army. It could have led to him being pensioned off and told he wasn't going to become Chief of Defence Staff. And it's one of the chapters in our book, and he's been very open about it. He's done 360-degree mentoring. He's created a downward imperative to listen to the people at the bottom. And I would leave you with this thought that this is now critical to understanding the new way of handling unthinkables in this environment. I've only been able to, in 25 minutes, give you a summary and a mood of what we've uncovered. But we've uncovered a sense of real anxiety about being overwhelmed in this new environment. And the challenge is how to bring together the energy, particularly of the next generation who've got great ideas and often better ideas than those at the top. We've heard it time and time again. People at the top are not listening to us, but they employ us still. So let me leave you with those thoughts and ask Carl to come up here and share his thoughts about how much of this is a serious difficulty or not.
Thank Nick. Great thoughts and great work, and all aimed, of course, at stimulating our thoughts and broaden our perspectives and broaden our minds. And indeed, I mean, it is true that things are changing and changing very fast. And a lot of us have spent part of our public lives trying to predict the future and trying to prepare for the future. And if those of us who are involved in international security affairs and global politics, if we look back at the transformative events of the past few decades, we can say they were all unpredictable, they were all unexpected. The Americans did not expect 9/11, but it happened, and it transformed quite a lot. The Americans did not expect the financial crisis of 2008, and the Europeans were quite convinced it was not going to affect them. And no one believed that it was the Chinese who were going to dig us out of that particular financial hole. And 2015, in spite of the fact that we should have seen it, we should have known it, we should have been alerted to it, virtually no European leader saw the storm of the refugee crisis coming and the virtual breakdown of governmental systems to handle it in certain countries, accordingly the breakdown in public confidence, and we have the fallout effects of that in the politics of a substantial part of Europe that we are all dealing with at the moment. So unpredictability has been the most predictable thing in the last few decades. Imagination has been far better than intelligence. Sorry for those that are employed in the latter occupation. So what can we do in this age? I think we can still, and we must, try to identify the megatrends. And I think the megatrends are there. They move somewhat more slowly. They might not be that easy to detect in the beginning, but sooner or later they are possible to detect and have them anchored. Can we predict the microstorms that are going to be caused by the different megatrends and the interactions between them? Debatable. If we can do that, imagination might be more handy. Can we see the tipping points? Rarely, because they come very fast and are by their nature unpredictable. Can we predict what used to be called the butterfly effects? The small thing that happens and then causes another even slightly bigger thing, and then a slightly bigger thing, and then a slightly bigger thing, and then something really big. Somewhat further down the line, we can rarely do that. But focusing on the mega trends, being more alert, looking around more than we usually do, looking less at our prepared PowerPoints and more at the small signs of change out there, having the resilience of our respective systems, so that the small thing that happens suddenly doesn't unravel everything. And then agility. I would say agility is the name of the game. To be able to change very fast indeed when it becomes necessary. And this is far more difficult in the public sector than in the private sector. Because in the private sector they have something called the bottom line. And the bottom line arrives sometimes every quarter, but unavoidably every year. And the bottom line is connected to what the consumers do. And if the consumers change and you don't see it, you will wake up to the bottom line, and that might be the end of your political career in private sector. So they are forced to adapt much faster than the public sector. The public sector can still say, oh, okay, probably all right. We don't need to change. But sooner or later it will happen there as well. I'm not going to be the one predicting the megatrends, but what will happen. Just one couple of remarks to show the unpredictability of it. The by far biggest attempt in the world to try to predict the future is what the Americans do every 4 or 5 years, when the National Intelligence Council does these global trends things. And I'm quite certain there are quite a number of you here in the room that have been part of the rather extensive global consultation process that they do in connection with that. When they published the latest one, in the beginning of this year, Global Trends 2035, the conclusions were different from where they were in any of the preceding ones. It's quite fun to read the old ones, by the way, to see what was wrong and what was right. And then it's a 50-50, which ain't that bad. But this year they said, we can't do it any longer in the same way. We think that we are able to say something broadly sensible about the next 5 years. But we can't say anything that is very sensible about 2035, because the pace of change is bigger and the unpredictability is larger than in any of the previous global trends report that they have published. That's interesting. The biggest international global effort to try to predicted that they couldn't predict. And it was rather expensive to come to that particular conclusion. And we can see also just 2 examples, I think, which are striking of the nature of the change. Facebook was mentioned. I think Facebook is 10 years old, if I remember it. The smartphone is 11 years old. When the iPhone came, and a lot of people were somewhat skeptical about the smartphone concept. Well, the consequences were fairly dramatic. If we start with the bottom line effect in the private sector, you can jump across the Gulf of Finland. The Finnish economy was driven by a company called Nokia. And Nokia had been very good at making rubber boots and television sets, but changed into mobile handsets. But they didn't see the iPhone effect. And it took 2 years, and that was the end of Nokia as we knew it, with fairly significant effects for the Finnish economy. Now, Nokia has reinvented itself and is back, but is completely out of that particular line of business. We see a digital hurricane sweeping through the global economy. And it's just the beginning. I mean, if you look at the iPhone was smartphones, mobile broadbands. Today we have subscriptions on mobile broadband, 5 billion of them. We've got 7.5 billion people in the world. We've got 5 billion mobile broadband subscriptions. A lot of people have 2, has to be said, but still. Of these, half are really 4G, as we call it, really fast things. And virtually all young people all over the world have now a level of connectivity that was unthinkable, even to the most advanced people 10 years ago. What's the economic, social, and political effects of that? We haven't a clue. And I would argue this is the beginning. Because in a couple of years, we're going to have the 5G with a capacity that is sort of 100 times, roughly, in terms of connectivity. And I looked at the figures. The prediction is that in 2023, we'll have 1 billion subscriptions of 5G, of which we at the moment have nothing. But it's just the technology that we know is down the line. That we know. We are living in the beginning of the digital age. And what that will mean, we don't know. Very few people in the beginning of the industrial age knew where it was heading, but it turned out to be a fairly big thing at the end of the day. The thing, going back to the global trend study, that sort of rattled me the most, I have to say, looking at the different things, is the digital thing, but also what happened in the biosciences. The most scary thing we have in the world today is kind of something called CRISPR, that you might be aware of. The possibility of gene editing. And that technology is, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 years old, 4 years old, something of that order. It is evolving very fast. It is difficult to foresee what is heading. It's raising ethical issues of the enormous proportions. And it's also raising issues of different societies reacting differently. Because the ethical issues presented by gene editing are clearly going to be handled differently by China and the United States and Europe. And what's going to be the implications of that for global security? I think a lot of our security and even economic debates are dominated quite a lot by the issues of the past. To take one obvious example is this guy in the White House. He is obsessed with steel and coal, by the way. And I grant him, there was an age when coal and steel was the foundation of national power. He had one of his famous tweets. He said, "We can't have a country without steel mills." He's never been to Estonia. He has been to Israel. Today it's brain power rather than steel power. And it's definitely not coal power. He is locked in the age of Bismarck and Jean Monnet. Then it was important. Now it's the completely different things that are dominating the power scene in the world and are shaping the future. And a lot also, I think, affects other issues. I use him as the obvious example that you use of old thinking driving politics that could be counterproductive, while other nations and other leaders are identifying faster the truly relevant changes that are happening in the world. And if we in our respective systems get locked into the problems of the past, while others identify the future changes faster, then we are gone. In the private sector, the bottom line will tell you that within the next quarter or year. In public policies, takes longer time, and the results could be more catastrophic. Thanks.